Welcome to Sex Talk with Kelly. I invite you to spend the next 30 minutes embracing your sexuality and exploring your edges. We've got an exciting show for you today. Our headmistress is going to whip you into shape. We're exploring BDSM, polyamory, swinging, and Tantra today. Let's get this sexy show on the road. Up first, I'm honored to have Headmistress Shahrazad joining us today. She's a professional dominatrix and owner of the Ritual Chamber Dungeon. She has degrees in social work and sexuality studies and has taught BDSM and sexuality workshops in Toronto and throughout the US and Europe. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, of course. So the main reason why I wanted to even do this show was to give more information out there to the viewers so they can explore and embrace their sexuality. And you do that on a daily practice in the work that you do. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit about what it's like being a professional dominatrix?
Sure, absolutely. Well, basically the way that what I do works is we create spaces where people can fulfill their fantasies of power exchange. And what power exchange means is situations or erotic scenarios in which one person takes power consensually and another person surrenders power consensually. Mm-hmm. And so we specialize in facilitating those kinds of scenarios. Mm-hmm. and teaching people how to do so in a way that is safe and in a way that is consensual. Mm-hmm. and desired by both parties.
Yeah, and I think what your work is fascinating because I know sometimes there are partnerships out there where they're wanting to engage in maybe BDSM or kink or explore a fetish and they just have no idea how to do that. So you're a great resource for someone who's wanting, for a couple or a person, to want to explore those things.
Yes, absolutely. We actually are accessed as a resource by many couples. Either one of them is into kink and BDSM and the other is not, or both are perhaps curious, or they have a little bit of experience but want to try something different. And in all those cases, we are very happy to support one or both parties within that couple through that process of fantasy fulfillment, because it's not always so easy to go from honey, this is what I've been thinking about for 10 years and I've never had the courage to do it, right, to actually seeing that fantasy through. And so we become the intermediaries to doing that.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank goodness you're around. So can you define what BDSM involves?
For sure. So BDSM is a triple acronym. The B and D stand for bondage and discipline. Yep. The D and S stand for dominance and submission. And the S and M stands for sadism and masochism. And most people get a little bit put off by this whole idea of BDSM because they associate it with pain. Right. But if you look at the acronym, S&M, or the component involving what many people would refer to as pain, is only 1/3 of that acronym. What BDSM is actually about is sensual control. Somebody taking controls in an erotic encounter and somebody relinquishing it. And that's a theme that we see in romance novels. That's a theme that we see all the time in many other contexts, but there is a more of a charge around this kind of play because of its stereotypes and associations. Yeah. And when it comes to stereotypes, we say it's the thing about pain. It's a funny thing because pain is something that we are trained to avoid in life. It's something we don't.
I made a note here where you like swapping out the word of pain for intense sensation. So I really like that that's how you swapped it out. So
yeah,
pain
absolutely.
isn't the pain that we're talking about here is not like stubbing your toe or your knee.
Yeah.
It involves an erotic, intense sensation.
Yeah, exactly. So basically how it works is that, if you think about, let's say a really hot sexual encounter that you had and perhaps having somebody bite you on the neck or spank you during that encounter felt really good because you were already aroused. Right. That's the kind of pain we're talking about. So
let's wrap up by you telling us about your work in the dungeon.
For sure.
Yeah.
So my work in the dungeon varies every day. Okay. Our sexuality is as unique as we are, and so every day brings another adventure, another fantasy into the psychoerotic world of whoever comes to visit me. And I don't take that for granted. So it is a huge amount of trust that they place in my hands, in the hands of my employees, and we honor that and we respect them for it, and we hold a space where they can explore those fantasies in a way where they're not going to be judged and they're going to be held safe throughout.
That's amazing. So how can people get in touch with you?
So you can get a hold of me at www.theritualchamber.ca, or you can follow me on Twitter at Shahrazad TRC. And either of those, you can follow the dungeon and all the happenings, events that are taking place.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I really hope our viewers got some good takeaways.
Great. You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Stick around. We'll be right back with more. Up next, we have local sex-positive registered psychotherapist Karen Grierson. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Good. So you have more than 20 years of experience in both the BDSM and polyamory and swinging communities in southwestern Ontario.
That's correct.
She is an incredible therapist at Bliss Counseling, and I'm excited to have her on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for being here. So can you help the viewers to understand a little bit more about polyamory and swinging?
Okay, so there's an arbitrary difference that we make between polyamory and swinging, largely in terms of where the relationship styles overlap with emotional relationships. Swinging is predominantly a sex-friendly act. People will go to parties and events and they'll connect with each other, have sex, and then go their separate ways. Whereas for poly folk, it's generally perceived to be more about the relationships. So these are considered to be dating and bonding relationships. There's more of an emotional investment that forms, which is not to say that the emotional relationships don't happen in swinger communities. It's just, it's not necessarily going to be the focus of what's going on. Okay. So people will go to a swingers club like M4 or Oasis Aqua Lounge in Toronto for swingers events. They go, they have sex, they maybe have a few drinks, they hang out, there's some social time, but that's not going to be really, there's not going to be anything more that goes on outside of that. Polyfolk, their relationships last as long as monogamous relationships can. Okay. So it's a different spin.
How can people find out about these communities locally?
So there's a big crossover locally between the BDSM community and the poly community. It's becoming more common that the poly community, because there are a lot of people who are poly who are not kinky, there's starting to be more demand for poly-friendly, not necessarily kink-oriented events. So there are different groups that get together through Meetup. There are some groups on Facebook that are designed more for connecting people just to get together who have similar lifestyle ideals. If you Google Meetups, polyamory, Kitchener-Waterloo, that will generally get you to just some different points of connection online. And then once you get to meet people in the community, you'll find out through less formal back channels about things like games nights or pub socials, and often, especially for the meetup community, somebody will just put up an event and say, so we're going to a pub on such and such night, if you happen to be available, come meet us. It's not nearly as organized locally as, say, the kink community is with its monthly munches and events. The swingers community, they do their meetups largely through Desire Cafe, and the website for that is desirecafe.ca. Okay. And there is a link somewhere within the website that gets you to meetups in Kitchener-Waterloo.
Okay, I think it's so important for people, especially locally, to know who to reach out to.
Absolutely.
To be able to dabble in a different form of lifestyle if they're wanting to, but if they're sitting at home with the doors closed and they don't know who to reach out to, and what our community is about and what it's offering.
Yeah, there's a lot of material available online for both the swinger and the poly community and the kink community itself. And a big part of the challenge for people who are especially moving from a monogamous relationship into any kind of an open relationship is, how do you narrow down what constitutes good research information versus perhaps less ethical information. So it's a bit of a trial and error process, and certainly getting connected with real-time members of the community to say, how did you guys make this transition? What did you learn? What were your lessons? So certainly getting connected FaceTime with the communities is something I always recommend to people who are saying, how do I do this?
And how can they get connected FaceTime with people in the community?
So finding the local meetups is usually the first place to start. Often we find as therapists who support the community, we'll get couples who come into counseling saying, well, we'd like to open our relationship, but we don't know how. So it's kind of on us to know what some of the resources will be to be able to provide them. I have a lot of contacts within the kink and the poly community. So what I will often do with clients is, with their consent, we can often facilitate meetings. And if I know that there are events coming up, I'll often tell my clients, this is something that's going on locally. This is the organizer. Get in touch with them. So we're a bit of a bridge for the people who haven't been able to find something that connects them successfully through Google, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, the web is great, but like I say, there's a lot of conflicting information. So sometimes finding somebody who knows somebody is the most direct and certainly least painful way of getting involved.
And everyone can find you at Bliss Counseling.
That's true.
So how would you support a couple, like you said, maybe who are wanting to open up, whether maybe when one person is maybe more resistant or they're just wanting to explore in terms of opening up? How would you support them, or how would you suggest they facilitate that conversation?
A good first step is to look at the motivations. Okay. Why do they want to open up their relationship? Are they both genuinely curious about what's going on, or are they trying to meet a need that's not being satisfied in the relationship itself? And then we usually try and sort of suss out what's going on with those unmet needs, and are they both voluntarily consenting to these kinds of explorations? Because like you say, if one partner is resistant, then there's a risk of a little more pressure and coercion than is going to be healthy for the relationship, and you run into all kinds of jealousy issues. Yeah. You run into some, unfortunately, potentially toxic kind of expectations that will develop. Yeah. So we facilitate conversations around, what are you looking to get out of this experience? Okay. And how do you do this safely? What are your expectations around sexual protection? What are your expectations around emotional connections that may or may not form?
And boundaries, right? Exploring those boundaries and establishing those boundaries so there's that safe zone.
Yeah, consent is a huge discussion that we have to have before going in, because if somebody's only consenting because they're feeling pressured, I'm going to lose my partner if I don't do this, then we have a bigger problem than just, hey, we'd like to go and have sex with other people. Right. So we have to be really careful about how we approach those conversations. Yeah. And once we get through all of that, we talk about, how do you set those boundaries? How do you set your expectations? How do you allow for variance in experience? Because often women will find it easier to find sex partners right off the bat than men will. Okay. So we have to be prepared for what kinds of bumps in the road are these couples going to encounter on their exploration.
But they can get in touch with you to help them work through some of these bumps on the road.
Absolutely. We are fabulous referees.
Yeah, that's great. So where can we get in touch with you?
I'm available through Bliss Counseling. Kelly will have all of the information. My direct email is karen@bliss-therapy.org, or you can find me on the web portal there.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure.
All right.
Stick around. We'll be right more. We'll be back for more on Tantra. Welcome back. Up next, we are talking to Joanne Flannery. She is a board-certified clinical sexologist and marriage and family therapist and an elite private practice in Chicago. Thanks for being here, Jo.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Always. So you're here to tell us a little bit about Tantra and Tantric sex. So a lot of times when people think about it, they think orgasming for hours, but we're going to take it back to basics. So can you just give us the 101 version of what is Tantric sex?
Yeah, and so first I want to start with Tantra just as a practice. And so Tantra is an ancient Eastern spiritual practice to expand consciousness. It's meant to adjoin and create wholeness between masculine and feminine energies. And so Tantra is practiced across the board. It's not just a sexual act, a sexual practice. Right. But in the Western culture, you're right, when we think of tantric sex, we think of Sting, right? He's little older than us, I guess, but whatever. Sex for hours, okay?
With his wife?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so more basics of Tantra, like Tantra 101, I guess, is would just be to discuss how Tantra is an intimate practice, and it's a practice where you join with your lover, where both people are consciously choosing to be there and to be in the moment with each other. And so it's this very zen and romantic practice.
It's like a sacred sexuality. So one thing that's coming up for me as you are sharing that is setting the space or creating the very erotic, intimate space for you where it's almost like a ritual practice. So you could set it up with comfortable pillows on the floor and lights, and make sure like the temperature of the room is a nice temperature so you can really be in this space together.
That's right. So setting the scene is really important. Having textures around that you want to touch, having smells that you're enjoying, and so really bringing out the five senses. You know, the practice of Tantra is it's bringing things from your daily life into the bedroom. So if you smell something during the day, don't block it off and categorize it as, oh, someone has on nice perfume. You know, take it in and carry it with you and bring it into your next sexual act.
I know that we've always talked about in the past what is if people can take more time to enjoy pleasurable experiences throughout the day. So if you're sitting there with a warm blanket around you, like really taking in that this feels really nice and allowing your body and yourself to actually enjoy that experience. So just slowing down and being more mindful with pleasurable experiences on the regular basis.
That's right. So being more mindful and then so being zen as well. So just living in the moment and taking everything for what it's worth and gaining all the pleasure that you can from the moment.
How important is breath work in Tantra?
So breath work is really important. It helps to do a lot of things. It can help to make you feel more excited. It can help to relax you. It can help to join you with your partner. So if you're doing like a coupled breath work, or if there's multiple partners, and you're doing a breathing exercise in unison or in sync, that can be really joining. And so breath work is wonderful to expand your consciousness because, like for example, there's Barbara Corrales, our favorite.
We love her.
She talks
Barbara Corrales
about the breath of fire, or at least that's where I learned it, was from her Urban Tantra book. And so when you do the breath of fire, it's such an exciting breath that you actually you get a little lightheaded. And so that's part of the experience. It's part of expanding your consciousness and kind of having an experience outside of your normal self.
One of my favorite things about Tantra is the eye gazing activities that they highly encourage that you engage with. So tell us a little bit about eye gazing, or looking into the soul. The eyes, what is it, the windows of the soul?
That's right, the windows of the soul.
Right.
That's right, yeah, that's exactly it. And so what's funny is you and I were talking about earlier that David Snarch says not to have sex in the dark, or that a lot of people have sex in the dark because these days people aren't looking into each other's eyes. There's almost that block from intimacy.
And it's too exposed, it's too vulnerable.
That's right. So that's the opposite of Tantra, because Tantra is like giving and receiving all of yourself and your partner or your partners. And so eye gazing is really important because eye gazing builds empathy, and eye gazing allows for a deep connection. So there are eye gazing practices where you can lay on your sides, facing each other on your pillows, and look into each other's eyes. And you can do it for short amounts of time at first, because it can be hard to just 5 minutes straight off the bat, so go for 10 seconds. What was that like? And then go for a little bit longer and see how you do. And then try to incorporate it into sex. See if you can eye gaze during sex. That's right.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Jo.
Yeah,
how can people get in touch with you?
You can find me on sexologyinternational.com.
Awesome. Or follow her on social media.
Social media. That's right.
Stick around. We'll be right back to Sexplore, the product of the week.